according to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, about 1.2 billion people in the world are adolescents, and about 1.2 million adolescents die each year, mostly from preventable causes. Also, an estimated 23 million adolescent girls become pregnant every year, either from unplanned sex, rape, or child marriage. Now, all of these factors have continually contributed to the troubling figures on maternal mortality in this part of the world. Now, these factors have been blamed on being the cause of death of many girls aged between 15 and 19. Now, the international agency said that many adolescents lack access to the essential information, quality services, and protective environments that they need to stay healthy and well. Mental health-related issues among adolescents is also an issue of concern, especially with the rise in suicide cases. Now, with this in mind, it is important to invest in the total well-being of an adolescent and youths, as this will broaden the opportunities for adolescents and young people to develop skills and use them productively, helping them acquire the capabilities to make good decisions. All right, joining us in the studio to make sense of this is the President, Society for Adolescent and Young People's Health in Nigeria, and the VC, University of Medical Sciences, Ondo, Professor Adeshegun Fatusi. It's nice to have you join us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Great. Now, make us understand. When we were growing up, one would say life was not this complicated with some of the social things, that happen around. Now, whether you call it social media, whether you call it civilization, whether you call it westernization, all of these have made life more complicated for a young person with a lot of distractions, with a lot of things happening around. Now, make us understand what an average adolescent now is facing that could be different from what an adolescent in the 80s or even in the 70s would have faced.
Again, thank you very much. So, when you think about young people, every young man or every young woman is actually an individual surrounded by several complex social and environmental issues. And as those social environments, complexity changes, the life of the adolescent also become more challenged or treated in another way. So when you now talk about this current context, if you take a look, first of all, you take a look at the family context. The family context has changed so much. Parents have less time, parents spend less time. The whole primary socialization that happens at home has been disrupted because more and more parents are not there to socialize. And even when they are there physically, they are not there in terms of the family process. So the family process has changed. The larger environment, the school process has changed.
Okay, so, sorry, Professor, let me put you on hold a little bit. I understand we have a message now. Let's go on a short break and then we come back. You're watching TVC Breakfast. On this segment, we're looking at the life of an adolescent and a young person in Nigeria and some of the things that they face, especially health-related issues, not necessarily social now, bringing it down, narrowing it down to the health challenges some of them face that could be a challenge to their attaining the level of productivity and capacity for each person. And in the studio, we have the Vice Chancellor of University of Medical Sciences, Ondo, Professor Adeshegun Fatusi. He has been helping us to make sense of all of this. Professor, I was asking you earlier, you were trying to give us a background to comparing and looking at the life of what the adolescent now faces and so on from the family front.
So, like I said, the adolescent, when you start from the home situation has changed, the family situation has changed. The family connectivity, the family communication, the family processes that we used to have that became the bonding factor for the young person in many homes are no longer there. When you come to the school environment, you find in the school environment that the teachers' relationship and connection with the students has also changed. And you see a lot more violence happen in the school environment. When you take the larger environment, the media world has changed with a lot of social media interaction, with a lot of disconnection between young people and their immediate environment. And all that boils down to a couple of things for young people. Number one, it affects their understanding of issues and the kind of engagement in risky behavior. So you look at young persons, there's more now, there's an increased risk of engagement in sex. And not just in sex, but even sex under the influence of drugs. One other issue that we must talk about is the issue of mental health. The young people of this generation have far higher rate of mental burden, and we also know that there are a lot more suicidal attempts happening among young people. The issue of drug cut across those two and even beyond. A lot of what we see, even in schools, when you talk about people having gang rape, even people are caught, they're not just done physically. There are issues that are influenced a lot of times with the use of drug. And drug has become a big problem from primary school all throughout society. So you have issue of, like I said, mental health issue, you have sexual and reproductive issue, you have issue of violence increasing among young people, you have nutritional problems. Because again, when young people look at models, they want to be like the model. The young girls don't want to eat. So when you take all that together, what it tells us is that today we have a much higher burden of problems among younger people.
So they are wanting to be like models, and people and things they see on TV sometimes put pressure on them to become desperate.
It put pressure on them everywhere. Right. For example, even sexual habits, sexual engagements. So the media is a big part of it, particularly the social media. You know, social media is like a jungle. Everybody says what you want. Everybody does what. But what is missing is the presence of the adult to help make sense. You know, if you're a young person, you see something on social media, and you can talk to somebody who's older and say, look, I saw this. What does this mean? Then you can get guided. So the problem is that the socialization process, the environment has changed so much that the young person has become more or less left on his own. And the society, the structure that helps us to achieve socialization and stabilization had more or less been removed to a large extent. So, you know, every young person, when you enter into adolescence, what happens is curiosity increases. All that are normal. You know, to have higher sexual urge is normal. To be curious about life is normal. What happens is because you have people who help you navigate those things. You have parental support, you have elders that helps the older generation to be able to cope with those issues. But those missing links are one of the biggest challenges we have now.
In the middle of all this, Prof, now is, you know, the issue of, you know, the respect for their rights. And in this context of our conversation, we're talking about their reproductive health and mental rights. You've spoken about the burden the young people, adolescents, you know, carry, especially under this present dispensation, so to speak, or this present generation. But, you know, help us to balance it out. They have rights, you know, they have burdens. They also have responsibilities to the society.
So when you think about rights, young people have rights, and society have rights to young people. So when you think about their rights, for example, is you have a right to have education, you have right to access information, you have right to access health services. All that are what the duty bearers, the state, should provide for them. And that means that you also give them the opportunity to be able to speak their mind, because you can't shape young people's life for them without their involvement. And so those are all about the rights. But on the other hand is the responsibility. So the responsibility grows out of, one, understanding who you are, your potentials, and the opportunity you have to use it. If you don't have the opportunity to utilize your capacity, responsibility becomes difficult for you. So young people have a responsibility, one, again, to be law-abiding in society, for example, to be part of those who contribute to the development of society. They have responsibility to also maintain their life, to maintain health, to maintain level of responsibilities. All that are more or less balanced in a way when you put the right structure and the right processes in place. Without those, you can't talk about rights and responsibilities in balance. They're going to be out of balance. So when somebody argues that, look, it's my right, it's my right, it's my right, and yet doesn't have education, he's going to argue for rights that he doesn't know about. And you're talking about him being responsible, and he doesn't have the capacity, he has not built his competency. How is he going to be responsible? Responsible for what? So those are issues that we must look at, the structures, the processes that enables rights and responsibilities to come to a balance and for us to get the optimal development among young people.
All right. When we talk about adolescent or even youth, there's another slant when we talk about the female child or the girl child. Some people have said that their own case is a little more complicated or has to be cared more for because of certain peculiarities. Talk to us from the perspective of the adolescent female child.
Okay. So the adolescent female, we often talk about that more because most of the outcomes, the negative outcomes, happen among them. A young boy gets engaged in sex early, a young girl gets engaged in sex early. The boy doesn't carry the pregnancy. The girl carries the pregnancy. And the society we live in, even if something happens, the boy disappears. So the young girl bears the burden of more of the reproductive outcomes that are negative. That's not only about pregnancy. Even when it comes to sexually transmitted infections, because of the anatomical construction of the young girl, she has the vaginal area, for example, is much larger. If you have sex with somebody who has HIV, you are more likely to contact it just because of the anatomic construction. You retain the semen and sperm. So that exposes you more. And the fact that you are very young also means that the protective layer around the vagina is not as strong as older female. So germs can penetrate more. So all the negative outcomes for pregnancy, for sexual transmitted infections are more for the female. But in addition, when you think about things like rape and violence, men are raped less. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but it's a bit more difficult. But young girls are far more vulnerable, and because the society also have not given them enough voice. This society where young boys seem to be prized and appreciated more, and they have more freedom. So the young girl is socially disadvantaged to even speak her voice and to even be educated. In many parts of this country, you find that many girls are not as educated as young boys. So all that culminates in the young girl having higher vulnerability, both biologically, socially, and physically. And the society does not protect her as much as it ought to do. But let me say that even though we say that young girls need to be protected, on the other side, one of the challenges we might be facing is that while you are thinking about young girls, if you don't think about young boys at the same time, you are going to have a problem. Because the girl that you educate, and the boy that you don't educate, will come back
find
to
themselves
be
in
a
the
problem
same society.
to the girl that you're educating. So
right.
when we talk about young girls, we must take it as a composite whole. To protect the girl, you must work with the boys, and you must work on the boys. You must work with the men. Even though at the end of the day, the girl is in the middle of it all. If you don't address the boys, the men, you won't protect the girl adequately.
Help us, speak to the need for a better national framework, because some of these provisions, or some of these ideals that you've spoken about, there seems to be a form of it now, existing at the state level, but at the national level, there is a yawning gap. So, and again, when we get to the university stage now, many of the youth are already formed, in terms of their mentality and their attitude to life. So, which also, begs the question of, the foundation, how essential, building them from foundation is essential. So two things for me now, a national framework and, how we can, help them more at the foundation stage before they get to that age where, the rebellion is like a second nature and, having to bring them down is tough.
Okay. Thank you for those excellent questions. Incidentally, I'm also the chair of the National Technical Working Group on adolescent health in Nigeria. So I sit on board of the technical group nationally. The country has a very strong policy, one of the best policies we see in Africa on adolescent health, on the adolescent and young people's health. Our new policy was just launched 2 years ago. And every element you want to talk about, either you talk about mental health, you talk about sexual health, you talk about reproductive health, you talk about violence, all of them are there. And what we need to do, because to improve the life of young people, it's not to improve the health of young people, it's not an issue for the health sector alone. The health sector can provide services to educate, and that links to the first question you asked. when you think about where do we begin to educate young people, where do we begin to build their capacity? The educational sector. Because the young people are in school. So the education sector has a lot to play in helping young people grow in terms of their health. Because that's when you can begin to teach them the fundamentals of health behavior. That's when you begin to teach them about sexual issues. And right now, the whole, in the last couple of months, about, family life education should be wiped away from school. So when will you have the opportunity to teach young people about the fact that, look, your body is important, you must protect it, and if you misuse it, these are dangers. So the education sector has a big role. The legal sector has a big role to say, here are the laws that we must put in place to protect the life of young people. So the health of young people is not a problem of the health sector alone. The health sector actually just play a little role, but strategic role. And so we must think that the national framework exists. What is missing, as is usual, is the implementation. And the biggest gap actually are the states. Because what happens is we develop policies at the national level, the states are not connected with it. If you ask me, how many states, for example, have adolescent health working officers? And how much have they put? Because somehow we don't recognize. See, you started by talking about the fact that about 1.2 billion young people dying every year. What do they die of? Preventable causes. Almost every cause of death among young people is preventable. Either it's drug, it is teenage pregnancy, it's abortion. They are preventable. And so when you then begin to teach them very early, to help them understand the processes, for example, of their body. Many young people get into sex, not because they really, but because they are young. Being young means you don't have experience. It means you can make mistakes. And that's why the point you make about starting early in schools, and starting early at homes, and starting early in the churches and the mosques. Because Nigeria is a place where people go to church and mosque almost every day of their life. And those are the primary places where we need to get young people to begin to understand issues and begin to protect them and begin to help them develop the kind of consciousness, the kind of behavior, and the kind of attitude that will ultimately make for good health. And because if you don't get adolescents to be healthy, you cannot get adults to be healthy. About 2/3 of preventable deaths among adults are due to behavior that are started as young people, smoking and all that. So they are all linked from adolescent to adulthood.
So you talk to us about your society for adolescent and young people's health in Nigeria. Probably not so many Nigerians would have heard about this society before, but what do you do and how do you engage young people?
So one of the things that happen, as we look at the spectrum of what has been happening in the country over the last couple of years, one of the biggest gaps is that there's no platform to harness all the players around adolescent health. Academicians like me, young people themselves, people in NGO world and other things. And so what the Society for Adolescent and Young People's Health in Nigeria is the national platform for bringing all players in the field of adolescent. Some people are educationists, some people are physical health, some people are mental health, but brings together a platform that can speak for adolescent health issues, that can provide the evidence to drive it, that can serve as advocacy platform, and a place where young people themselves can bring their ideas and help to drive. So what do? We provide that platform, and then every 2 years, we will organize a national conference. And that national conference is where we look at the evidences. What had happened in the last 2 years? What are the evidence of change? What are the gaps? Where should Nigeria be going next? So that is one major activity, to bring everybody together every 2 years to just look at where we are, do a critical analysis, and then begin to frame the future as where we should be going as a country in the next 2 years, and provide resources also to support certain things. For example, when we come together, we look at sessions to build young people's capacity, we look at what we need to do in schools. We were talking about universities, for example, last time. And universities are one of the biggest gaps, because people assume that when you go to university, you are formed, and you are. Many young people in universities don't know their left from their right. They go to university at 16. That's the first place they are independent. And so they are like, it's like being thrown into a jungle with no protection. And so one of the things we look at is, what can we even do in universities? What curricula can we build? Where can we integrate? So this is all about looking at the entire system. And so that's what the conference is, our major effort. But beyond that, we do regular education. We run webinars about 4 times a year to speak at various dimensions. We produce resources to support various interventions. We harness the available ideas to help push Nigeria forward. So that's what our society does. And our next conference, incidentally, is in Lagos, and it's coming up this August, 16 to 19, at the Zone. So, and media practitioners are also a big part of that.
All right. We hope to keep in touch in that regard, because August is still it's close, but it feels it's still a little far. Right. But it's fine. Yeah. Right.
About that upcoming conference, I just wanted to know, as a fallout from the last time you had the conference, and now what's you seek to achieve now, as in how close are we now to actualizing, our dreams for a better, society for the good of the youth and the adolescents. So where are we headed, or what's the future like, really?
So where we are heading and what we think is that we think we need to bring more innovations to drive the agenda. That's what we have seen, looking back 2 years. Right now, we are in an age where there's more media. We are using more social media. It's a digital age. So how can we get to the young person who is far from the town? Is there a way to use social media, for example? Are there ways to use different approaches? So this conference is looking at innovation. So in fact, the title of this conference is Achieving 2030 Target. 2030 is the SDG. So it's Achieving 2030 Targets, driving innovations for adolescents and youth. So our focus here particularly is to say, what do we need to do more? Not just do more of the same. What do we need to do differently. That will enable Nigeria move from where we had been to where we ought to be. So there's a lot of our focus around innovation. And that innovation is also looking at the major dimensions around adolescents, mental health and resilience, climate changes, inclusion of young people, issue of gender-based violence that is increasing our environment. And all that are part of the things we are looking at and saying, look, how can we, one, get young people to be at the center of the agenda to make social development goal a possibility? On the other hand, how do we get the system to achieve for young people using innovation and using new approaches?
All right. We have to leave you here now. We must thank you, Professor Adesegun Fatusi, the Vice Chancellor, University of Medical Sciences, Ondo, as well as President of Society for Adolescent and Young People's Health in Nigeria, for all of the insight you've given to us in this regard. We look forward to your conference, and we keep in touch to be there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you very much.